just past 1 o'clock Eastern Time, and it is Tuesday. That means this is Pew and Beyond, and we welcome you to our conversation today. The Pew and Beyond is very much a conversation. So for those of you who are watching, please say hello. I see lots of people coming on. Astrid saying hello. Peter Misicek's here. Everyone's here.
Oh, Peter, hey.
And welcome you.
Shazak.
And our guest today is Janet Marshall. Janet is the Director of Congregational Development in the Diocese of Toronto. And my name is Neil, and I'm in Montreal.
And my name's Lisa Vaughn. I'm the Parish Vitality Coordinator in the Diocese of Nova Scotia. And it is a delight to have you here, Janet. You've been a mentor of mine for a long time. And so it's really an honor to have you here today and sharing a lot of your wisdom and experience, especially as you've been watching and listening during the pandemic about what's been going on in church land, not only in your diocese, but across Canada. So great opportunity for us.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. So many friends hoping for good conversations.
For lots of really great comments. And so we are transitioning with this Pew and Beyond a little bit in terms of where we locate ourselves. So I am monitoring my Neil Mancourt page, and we are also monitoring the Resources for Stewardship page as best as we can. So I hope that you can make your comments. And we seem to have lots of people. I know I have lots of people here in front of me. Kathy, hello as well. So as I said, we do want to hear from you. So please comment, say hello, make yourself known, and join the conversation. So Janet, you were the first person who ever inspired me to get involved in different aspects of congregational development. And it makes it sound like a bunch of relics. I was going to say all those years ago.
I'm a relic.
But it wasn't that long.
I'm a relic. Yeah.
But
well, it's an unusual field, right? There are not too many people in this field necessarily, or who've had the privilege of working in this field for an extended amount of time. So I do realize that I'm in a kind of unique position in that, and yeah, feel very gifted because of it.
Yeah, it is a wonderful to sort of come alongside people and watch God at work amongst them. And we thought part of the conversation we'd like to have today, I mean, if anyone has any questions for Janet, anything you ever wanted to ask, this is your chance. You've got Janet captive for an hour, so you can ask. But we did want to think a little bit about, with the COVID experience, what has this done to us? What has it meant for us? And as we begin to emerge into the light, as it were, what does it mean for us? I wonder if we could start with maybe what do you think is, from your point of view, it's meant for us.
Yeah, I mean, this is a big topic, and there are all sorts of ways that we're experiencing all sorts of different things and different ways of doing things. And you know, one of the things I hear the most often is that the pandemic has accelerated the trends in the church at least 5 years into the future, you know, faster than we've ever thought. And the wonderful side effect of all of that, of course, is that we've learned we can change on a dime. We've learned we can pivot, and we can pivot creatively. I am really looking forward to the next time I walk into a congregation and sit with a group who try to tell me that they're change resistant, and I can just go, no, you're not, you know, because look what we can do. But thinking about it in a different way, because a lot of what I'm doing right now is trying to think about how we can begin to have the conversations we need to have to prepare churches to re-enter, to re-engage, and what's going on here for not only us, but for the people in our neighborhoods and communities. One of the things that I've been really aware of is that for the past year, we have been in a very kind of tight cycle of bouncing back and forth between having new experiences and experimenting to do something different so that we can respond to the experience, and having that experience and then responding really quickly again and experimenting again, and then having the experience and responding very quickly. And if anybody has ever done any work in adult education theory or knows the cold learning cycle or something, it's bouncing back and forth between those two things that we know we can all do, but we've not had any time yet to do the rest of the cycle, which is to reflect on what's been happening and to make meaning of it. So what does this mean for us, not just today, but what does this mean to us in terms of our future? What does this mean to us in terms of our experience of God at work in the world, or congregational life, or you can take it any way you want to go. And as a result, this bouncing back and forth between experience and experimentation, we're actually in a place right now where we're exhausted and having little creative bursts kind of at the same time. And I don't know about you, but in our end, the creative bursts are getting smaller and smaller and smaller because we're exhausted. And you add to that also a layer that, you know, we're all feeling vulnerable and not sure when we're going to stop feeling vulnerable again. So that's kind of the space that I've been doing a lot of kind of reflecting and reading and praying about recently, is this move, you know, how is it that we help our communities and ourselves as leaders in the church move into a reflective space, begin to have those deep listening conversations with each other, to hear about where we are and to listen for God in all of that, and then to start saying, so what does that mean for what comes next? And not wanting to rush it, but taking the time. So I say that as a kind of conceptual piece, but with as many questions attached to it as you could possibly imagine.
I think that's right, though. I love that. You know, it has been a very vulnerable time, so many levels,
Yeah.
so many parts of our lives.
Yeah. And the making meaning piece is good. I think it's not just for us. I think we're living in an environment now where the communities around us, the people living around us, they're going to really want to make meaning out of what's just happened to them and for them. And I think that I have a hunch that how do I live a meaningful life is going to be a really lively question for people. And if we as the church can't speak into that, then we've missed a huge opportunity, and we should be ashamed of ourselves, because we have so much to say and so much to offer.
I like what you're saying about the listening and listening to one another in church, but I think also you're indicating that we need to listen to the voices of those in our communities who may not be connected to a faith community, and what are the questions they're asking.
Yeah.
Probably not about, you know, buying more stuff. It's about the, you know, the coming out of the isolation kind of thing. Yeah.
It is very much about listening to people, and I don't know about you, but I've certainly noticed that even as you wander around the neighborhoods these days, masked up, that it's really easy to have conversations with people on the street. I know I live in a neighborhood where mostly people kind of keep to themselves, but these days that's not the case at all. I mean, just the other day, I had a conversation with someone who stopped their car in the middle of the road and just wanted to have somebody I'd only met once before, wanted to have a conversation about just how people were doing and what the church was planning and those sorts of things. And so I think we've really got these opportunities now to step into conversations in brand new ways. The other way, of course, is that the pandemic has, one of the things that happened early in the pandemic, and this happened across the country, is that our churches were able to respond to frontline needs like food security, housing, clothing, that sort of thing. We were able to respond fastest. We were out there much faster than social service organizations or government organizations, because of course they needed to work all the policy and procedural pieces out, right? Where we just figured, okay, well, if they can't come into the building, we'll take the food out. And so we've been out on the front lines in a very different way, which means that we have a new place again at the table with government agencies and social services, the likes of which we haven't seen in a long time. And so now we are getting to have conversations, not just with our neighbors, with people who we're with in these food security ministries, and also around the table with our city politicians and other partner organizations. So all these things are kind of opening up for us right now. They could shut down, but if we're not ready and able to kind of continue in the relationship building.
It's true. I mean, a lot of churches pivoted really fast on that. As you said, they said, well, okay, you know, I mean, we can't do a community meal, we'll do a community takeout meal.
Mm-hmm.
And that does open up incredible new opportunities to really, for the church to speak into the public sphere.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
We'd love to hear any stories from anyone online. Just give us your stories as well about that. What have you done? What pivots did you make in your community around that? But as I was saying, you know, it's given us, as you were saying, this new opportunity to speak into the public sphere. And COVID has revealed a lot about our structures, our societies.
It's revealed a lot of the flaws. Yeah. It's also opened up a lot of really interesting new opportunities for our churches as well, because one of the major pivots we made, of course, was to online worship and online gatherings and online. And I'm sure you've had these conversations before about the incredible way that online Revive and book clubs and alphas and daily offices have really connected with people. I think that we may come out of the pandemic in churches that have really taken that up. Will come out in as different kinds of community than we came in, and which is really very interesting. I was talking with a church the other day who was doing this and was saying, you know, the really interesting thing is that the people who are gathering with regularity are not the same old cliques. They're cross fertile. They're making new relationships, and some of these groups have drawn in other people, friends and family, because it's way easier to invite somebody to a Zoom gathering than it is to ask them to walk through the doors of their church. And so I'm really, really curious about what's going to happen in the first coffee hours post-pandemic restrictions, as all of these kind of new relationships are forming, and how people are going to cluster at coffee hour. The other thing that's happened, of course, is that you know, we've had a bunch of people who have been able to join in into the church services who have not been able to get to church because of age or you know, health issues. One of my favorite stories is of the church who does morning prayer 5 mornings a week, and are beginning to and started to gather a number of people from that congregation who had drifted away because they just couldn't get to church anymore. And one day they had tech issues, and the lone voice able to lead morning prayer was a 94-year-old who lived in care. And it changed just the sense of what community could be inside the church.
Wendy Newman's made she's got one example from the Diocese of Niagara: rest and hygiene centers in several of our churches, a place for people experiencing homelessness to go, wash up of coffee, talk safely. Another is our centering prayer group actually grew, and now we have 2 groups. So there's been much spiritual reflection and development.
Yeah.
Janet, I'm wondering if you could say something about what you're seeing related to laity and ministry. We've seen just something really neat happening here with a number of folks embracing ministries like never before, but wondering, how do you see this taking shape post-COVID?
Yeah, that's a good question. And that's going to be really very interesting because I think we've had people who've needed to take kind of more responsibility for their spiritual life through the pandemic, and to do that in a way sometimes out of sort of isolation and that sort of thing. So they really need to act. And so I mean, my hope is always to see more lay ministry emerge and more people interested in really getting engaged and finding the church the place to engage. And you know, I am a lay woman, and I have my soapboxes around the tyranny of clericalism. but but I think it's, you know, I think it's something that if we, well, it's interesting, you know, I've been working with the National Church a bit over the past few months, and they're doing a strategic planning exercise right now. And what became really evident was that the strategic planning wasn't going to be able to go forward as normal during the pandemic. So they pivoted, and instead we've done a whole bunch of listening groups across the country. And one of the things we definitely heard, or I definitely heard in those groups across the country, was the absolute blessing of lay leadership and the importance in lay leadership and the importance of lay leaders being able to take on ministries of worship and prayer and groups and to share in like a team, you know, with clergy and other lay people to make all of this possible. One of the delights of having to go online was the number of places that I was talking to over this time where they were saying, you know, we had to pivot. We're an older congregation. We really wanted to go online. So the only people that we could go and ask to help us were our kids and grandkids. And now you've got all these kids and grandkids now going, oh, that's what I could do for the church. Or that's what I could do with the church. And so you know, it's one of those things that it's right there for us, but it doesn't happen. The raising up of lay ministry doesn't just happen, right? It's a gift that we need to tend and nourish and notice. And really interesting to see what happens about that over the next few months.
And also the hunger, right? I think that for me, that's been absolutely one of the gifts of this time, the connecting a much wider group of people than I might have, just because instead of driving to the Eastern Townships or the Laurentians, we connected online. And I think it's beyond the Zoom issue; it's the connecting issue. And there is a real, and maybe it was heightened by partly by the pandemic, but there is such a hunger for, as you say, engagement, involvement, for spiritual vitality amongst the people of God. And there are some awesome people of God all over the place, very willing to engage.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that we're going to need to be really paying attention to as we come out of the pandemic is really looking again at how do we build not just sustainable ministries, but sustainable ministries that can flourish, that can be vital. And I know for us, you know, we're doing a lot of work around regionalization of ministries, and I mean that's all structural, right? But it's a structure that actually underlies a different attitude towards ministry, which suggests that we do this together, as team and in community with each other, in a broader sense of community, both lay and ordained, in order to understand that our mission field is this whole piece of geography and not just the little corner that our particular congregation sits in. And I'm hunching that that's going to be a major piece of interest and work, and that's going to need some encouragement and resourcing and collaboration, collegiality to across diocesan boundaries, in order to take its shape. And I know that some dioceses are ahead of us on that one, like Eastern Newfoundland and Labrador and Ottawa and such. But that's one of the accelerations I think we're seeing thanks to COVID.
The boundary lines are blurring in a whole bunch of ways. And like you say, in terms of kind of the regions and that kind of thing. I know there's a note there from Lynn Usan. She says, I came across a quote that said, being heard is so close to being loved that for the average person, they're almost indistinguishable. She said, I've noticed more openness to listening these days. Lynn's in the Annapolis Valley.
Hey, Lynn. I have come to believe that every process that we might do with a church, for whatever reason it is, for visioning, for reconfiguring, for whatever, they all have to begin with intentional, empathetic listening. And that's something that happened in COVID, right? Because what happened was we had to Zoom these things. And so how do you engage a congregation or a group of people in a bigger process of mission planning or whatever on Zoom? And the way you can do it is by having listening groups. 7 people, 9 people on a Zoom call. We used an appreciative inquiry approach. What's been the best thing about your church's ministry during the lockdown? How have you been feeding your spirit and soul? What is it that you're experiencing or learning now that you need to keep after this is over? What seems superfluous to you now, not as important as it did before? Those sorts of questions, and really spending time listening to each other. And what happened was that in listening to each other, we also started hearing the voice of God, and hearing that yearning, that pull that is the kind of the spirit working in us, finding God's fingerprints inside of us, where what we kind of long for next is now being talked about and thought about and prayed about. And we started being able to hear with some real clarity those values that sit at the heart of these Christian communities. One of my new COVID mottos is restrictions reveal values. And so remember all those value exercises we used to do where we'd really work hard to try and kind of clarify a value, but here they are, they're just presented like a flower, right? And you see them, and at that point then you can start opening your imagination to the new ways that God might be leading you to live those values, and live those values in this very strange, very transitional time we're in.
I love that.
So reflexive living, empathetic listening. Yeah.
Restrictions reveal values. I think that's great. I put that in the comments. I love that. It's true, isn't it, though? I mean, under pressure, it's kind of been like a refining thing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. And the, well, I mean, being isolated, being on our own, having a good kind of space to be able to have good conversations, deep conversations with each other. Those are, yeah, that's a ministry in and of itself.
Zoom's kind of interesting in terms of some of those listening groups because we're all equal on here. Everybody's box is the same, and we're in. If we're shaped in a circle in chairs, sometimes you can tell who's wearing the hat for the important role or whatever that is, but also only one person can talk at a time. So there's no speaking over, so there's something about that does really lend itself to listening and recognizing that everyone's valued here on this. And yeah, I think there's real gold there. I think there's the Spirit will speak to us in those kinds of moments.
And the other thing is that we're always looking at ourselves too. So we're seeing ourselves in a mirror, basically, as we're in the listening group, and tempering our response as well in different ways. So,
fascinating. You're right. Yeah. We will relate differently. Yeah. And I think, as you've pointed out or indicated, somewhat, I mean, some of our communities are going to continue this way.
Yes.
And for
yeah,
folks who have been disabled or who haven't been able to physically come to a church, we're connecting there. Have you explored at all or heard stories about how people are helping to integrate online guests, visitors, especially those those who've returned, maybe been lapsed, or brand new people who are just coming to check us out? Are there any kind of best practices around how do we help people integrate?
That's a really good question. And I'm actually starting to have some conversations with people I know who are in the arts community, because they know about this already, right? They talk about the funnel effect, where you help move somebody from an observer or an audience to a participant, to a member, to a part of the community. And I think that we have a whole lot to learn, and I am as eager to learn it as anybody else about how that funnel happens, and what we can do to keep that. I mean, there are stories. We all have heard the stories of the people who have, happened upon the live stream and then gone to the website and then gotten in touch and ended up in catechism class online through the pandemic. I mean, we've got those, but I think we need to have a better kind of idea about how we actually do that with some purposefulness, so that when God brings someone to us and they reach out their hand to us virtually, we're able to virtually reach back, and for that relationship. Yeah, I think it's really quite something, because yeah, lots to learn there.
And just comment on your previous comment, Lisa. She goes, yes, Zoom is the great equalizer. There's no particular pulpit. It's absolutely right, isn't it?
It's been really funny because...
Sorry,
what was that?
I'm just saying hello to Wendy Thompson from the UK watching. Nice to see you, Wendy.
Oh, great. Yeah, great. Yeah. One of the funny things that we've been doing recently is that, of course, it's vestry or AGM season, right? And so there are a number of our churches where there are new people who, by virtue of the kind of virtual rules for membership, have been able to come and be a voting person at the AGM and vestry. And I'm getting these stories where I just have to laugh about people's reactions to the idea that there's someone there that they've never met in person, but who's aligned themselves so much to the church by this time that they want to actually come to the AGM. And so I ended up writing a whole set of introductory remarks for clergy that basically start off by saying, isn't it fantastic that we have these people here? Isn't it so wonderful? We as a congregation have been able to do this during the pandemic. So to get ahead of the grumpy voices around who's this person and why are they voting?
I have another question for you, Janet. If you have some insight on this, I've been getting a lot of questions about buildings and properties, and someone I had a conversation with earlier today saying, you know, we're using our property well, but it's a pretty big property. We could probably use it better, and maybe as a revenue stream, or maybe to be missional in some way. So, wondering what are you hearing on the ground, not only in Toronto but again across Canada, related to properties?
We could do a whole series on this one. Yeah, and one of the things that's shaking loose for us a little bit is where there's an oxymoron at play here, right? So people are realizing that they can do ministry and be church without going into the building for a whole year. And the importance of the holy space is often a value that gets named. So the holy space of that building. And so that's just, it sits in a kind of dynamic tension with each other. And again, I don't think we know yet, we don't have a clue yet about the attachments to buildings on the other side of the lockdown. And, you know, if we're not in our buildings again, like some urban areas till fall, Christmas, you know, it'll be a long time. So we don't know. Lots of things we don't know right now. And the question, so how can we turn our property from a what feels like a liability in many ways to an asset for ministry and mission, a resource for ministry and mission, is a very, very important question. And there's been lots of experiments and some very, very interesting projects that have emerged. I know the Diocese of Ottawa is doing some really interesting things with the property development. Toronto started on another kind of generation of these sorts of things. Halifax, you know, I often look to the cathedral and those two pieces of property on either side and what they learned from one and what they learned from the other, right? So, and Montreal, holy smokes, we went down this road a few times.
Yes.
And so these are very, very important questions, and they're really at the heart of how we want to be a place where community can thrive, can be, can find life, health. I was just on a call this morning with someone who said, you know, I think after COVID, how does the church become a third space for people that isn't monetized, you know? And so we have these questions about the gifts that we have inherited of our properties. And surely there can be ways that we can figure out what we can do about them, whether we give some away, sell some for income, redevelop some. I mean, these are all lively conversations around the place right now. The one caution I always put on the table is that there can be a tendency for us to transfer our mission, our sense of our participation in God's mission for the world to our buildings. And then say, see, we're really missional here because of all of these different community groups that are using our building. And then we can get really confused and sad because all those people don't understand that it's our mission and that this is building up the kingdom of God and all that kind of stuff. And then we've been down that road many, many times. So whatever it is we do, it needs to be in relationship to our mission actively and not just giving it away in those ways. But I say you could do a bunch of conversation. I have someone you should talk to on this around this very, very topic, because people are beginning to do a lot of theological reflection around properties and ministry and mission.
Astrid put a question in, a third space that isn't monetized. I love that, because of course Starbucks saw itself as a third space. That's what they created.
Yeah.
Of course, it's highly monetized.
Yeah. I keep throwing down hints and seeds, waiting for the place that is got like enough room in the sanctuary that they could take out the back half of the pews and put in a kids playground. You know, in one of those neighborhoods that's just like there's no kids playground around and about or anything like that for the winter. I would love to see that happen. It's one of my wacky dreams. Nobody's picked up the idea yet, but you know, just I think as we come out of the pandemic, we don't know how eager our neighbors are going to be to gather again. We don't know how vulnerable people are going to feel and how much they're going to need to test things out before they know that they can re-engage. And if there's some way that our churches, our church buildings, our locations, our people can find ways, safe ways to help people in our neighborhoods do a bit of that, I think that would be a gift to the community. I'd love to see, you know, hosting some block parties or some, you know, I don't know, just be imaginative about all of that. Some, you know, barbecues on the lawn, or just you know, just to kind of, I don't know, what do they call that when your car's battery is dead and you give it a boost? You know,
yeah.
Just,
Jumpstart.
Jumpstart.
Yeah.
Well, and there are opportunities. Many of our properties have kind of lawn space and park space and that kind of thing. And if people aren't feeling comfortable enough to come inside, yeah, there are opportunities there to build relationships and those kinds of things with children and families. Yeah, it's great.
We had a number of places in last summer who bought a bunch of hula hoops, you know, and if they had green space, they just scattered the hula hoops at 6 feet intervals all over their yard, and then people could come and picnic or do things within their hula hoop.
Love it. That's great. That's great.
I think as well, one of the things that we talked about before, I want to get back to the vulnerability piece, because I think that's really important for us. It's part of our story, isn't it? And it's one now increasingly we share with the people all around us. Because you know, we're talking about a lot of people feel vulnerable, but that's kind of part of our whole story as the people of God.
Mm-hmm. No, that's very true. We're good with vulnerable. We have a comfort level with vulnerable because of our story as a people of God. We know that God is there before us. We know that we're not alone. We know that we're supposed to be in community. And we're supposed to be loving that which God loves. And so I think there's all sorts of ways that we can reach out, be a little courageous. And I'd really be interested in hearing even from the people who are listening, you know, some, you know, ideas or questions you might even begin to ask your congregations or communities that could get them thinking about how it is that they might be able to share that sense of being vulnerable is just fine. We get that. Yeah.
And hear that, as all of you out there, we love some comments, questions, thoughts about that. I think it's a really great challenge. We want to hear from you.
Mhm.
Gail says, by the way, it's good to see you.
One of the things we don't yet know is around the mental health. I mean, I don't think we're out of that blizzard either. And not that we're counselors, but we do, you know, we have opportunity to help people come alongside. God, you know, our scriptures say something about trusting God and helping us to find healing and wholeness. So I think there may be some opportunities there in terms of some pastoral supports. And we may have a whole slew of divorces and bankruptcies, and I mean, we have a long ways to find, you know, what's going to be the fallout. But there could be some real opportunities as Christians. Not everybody has an EAP plan, and good supports around me, even family supports, non-judgmental kind of folks who will just listen and let you cry. So this is not rocket science counseling stuff.
Yeah.
Opportunity pastorally.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, no, third space, right? Just, you know, sitting on the lawn in the summertime with you know, iced tea and just being present. We have I know of a few priests actually who do that with have done that the whole way through the lockdown. Just have kind of office hours on the front lawn of the church, and they just sit there, and if people want to come and talk, they come and talk, and if they don't, they just sit there and watch people go by and get to know them a little better. Yeah.
And that's what, remember when we had the biker priest, Steve Martin,
Yeah.
do exactly that. You know.
Yeah.
Got some comments.
No.
Leanne Matthews says, in our supper club community, there are loads of vulnerability, sharing, admitting we don't know everything, making mistakes, being human. I'm beginning to really feel that that is the essence of evangelism, actually. It's creating that space. It's creating a space for people to fill. Oh, wow, we're getting a lot of comments now. Wendy Newman. The Y and the public library are also non-monetized third places. The church is different. Janet's comment about ensuring there is clarity. Yeah. And the free use of the church places by community groups. Can you say more about that?
Like clarity around the use of space.
Use of church spaces by community groups. Because I think that's important. I think what you're saying is right. We just kind of fill our churches with lots of groups that aren't really aligning with our mission or purpose, then we may be missing out on a huge opportunity.
Yeah. There's a story I like to tell about a church where they actually, as part of a kind of mission action planning, that they decided that they would really work to build relationships with all the different groups, the leaders of the different groups that were using the church building. And you know, it's not an unusual kind of action step, you know, to do that, and to talk with them about their mission, you know, their vision for their own activities, you know, what was of value of them, what, you know, how using the church building adds or detracts from that, all that kind of stuff. And there's a group in the church that was a photography group, and they were very resistant to the conversation. Just really took a long time of even just kind of relationship building before they would sit down and have the conversation. And finally, I think sort of did, because they wanted to keep their tenancy. And it was through that kind of conversation that the people in the photography club realized how incredibly interested the church was in the arts, and the long connection between the church and the arts, and asked the photography club about, you know, this spirituality and the spirit in these pictures and that, and the conversation became very, very rich, you know, so that, you know, the idea of kind of having photography exhibits that were open to the church and that sort of thing all kind of emerged. and then a tragedy happened, and a member of the club died very young, very suddenly. And the president of the club, his first phone call was to the priest of the church. And that would have never happened, you know, without the long, gentle relationship building piece. And it's only in those conversations that people, you can put signs up all over the place about the use of your property, but really, and who's welcome and who's not welcome, and we can fiddle over pronouns, and you are welcome here, all of that kind of stuff. But the fact of the matter is that it's really people to people that's going to communicate anything that's going to stick or have any value, any kind of lasting value in the place. So ministries of hospitality, I think Diana Butler Bass used to call it gracious and unexpected, or extravagant and unexpected hospitality, are really, and maybe that's another looping around for ministries of lay people, who the people in your church who are just, who also are trying to kind of reemerge after a pandemic, and can imagine reemerging as in a ministry of a gracious and unexpected hospitality around the building, around the church.
Yeah, I mean, I think that our churches have hospitality written into their DNA. We charge for them, and imagine if we just didn't charge, but invited the community in to even if it's the strawberry social, invite the community in, and just don't charge. What a surprise! What blessing might come from that.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing that I've always kind of puzzled about is that the times when we do really successfully invite the community in, like our bazaars or those sorts of things, where people are all over the building, we actually take the advantage of that hospitality at that time? So you're working to make relationships with people when that's happening, or are you mostly just kind of getting out of their way and giving them change?
I had a comment from Wendy in the UK. Interesting to hear your reflections on the Canadian scene. Lots of similarities with the UK. Yeah, the Wendy and I went to seminary together. So it's nice to see you, Wendy. Are you still in Cambridgeshire? And Wendy's a Canadian, but stayed in the UK. Peter Misicek has a great question. He says, if we think a year out from our date of return, let's say 2022, what are we going to wish we had done to ensure that our onboarding was done well?
Boy, that's a great question, Peter, and I would love to actually ask that of the group. I mean, there are times where I think, boy, I just it would be wonderful to have a larger community of people kind of asking and thinking about these questions together, as we all kind of are trying to resource and equip our churches for onboarding, for the on-ramp. What would we have loved to know? That being said, because with Peter I always have to flip it a little bit, we are also in a time and where I think we need to be comfortable with the idea that we actually are going to be massively transitional for a really long time. That there's a whole bunch of stuff that we won't know until we know it. and so there's going to be probably this dynamic of kind of running on hunches and observations and educated guesses and praying that we're onto something here, without actually knowing well, and holding open the possibility that actually this ain't it, and we got to toss it over our shoulder and make another pivot. I think that's all true too. Mind you, when you maybe before this started, where we talked about the old Vital Healthy Parishes gatherings at the National Church, realizing that one of the powerful things about those gatherings of people who are interested in congregational development across the country was that we learned together that the greatest learning was from trying something that didn't go the way we thought it was going to go. Yeah. And I think we're going to still be in that situation for a long time, where we're going to be very, very transitional, and we have to hold it lightly, which is why I would circle back around. I guess if there was a main message here today, I was circling back around to the importance of deep empathetic listening and learning, and being open to that for an extended period of time.
Janet, one of the things I've been repeating that you've shared with me over the years, and I attribute to you, is leaning to the health, and where there's good stuff, like it's appreciative inquiry stuff, where there's, where we see the spirit at work, or where there's good spiritual fruit, or where there's health, there's something there, and leaning into that, I think is, whatever that looks like, and maybe it'll work for a while, and then after a while it won't, but I think there's something about that, and I think the spirit's in that's showing us something.
Yeah, I think that's going to be really important as we go forward, because there's going to be and there is a prevailing attitude of scarcity and fear of scarcity. That, I mean, we've had a very kind of upbeat conversation here, but we know that one of the other very real things in our environment is that not all churches are going to make it out the other side of this. That part of the acceleration is also the acceleration to the decline, and that people are going to be really, really worried about holding on to what they've already got. So leaning to the health, leaning to the opportunity, leaning to the is going to be, I think that's going to be really, really important, or else, because we may be able to change because we're frightened of something that we don't want to happen to us, but we're never going to be able to make a change to something really positive and life affirming and good, unless that comes with that lean to the health, to the positive, to the God that out of all of this. And there's going to be a huge temptation to lean into the decline.
But I think if that word of hearing and listening, it seems to be the word that's going around the church right now, that we're all really working on, because it's been such a profound experience. It's been such an extraordinary experience. We need to listen to each other to make meaning about this, and to ask and hear honestly, where are we now? Where are we going?
Yeah, I think so. And telling the stories from what we're hearing are going to be really important. We need to learn from each other's stories. I rely on other people's stories all the time. And I tell them again and again, and I, having to, and because people can't, I think, when you're working with the church, imagining its future, it really can't move to something it can't already imagine. It can't imagine in some way. And so we have this role of kind of helping paint a portrait of the future, and we do that by telling stories. Talk about mixing metaphors, but telling stories about what others have done, or how this would look. For the first time in a long time, because of the lockdowns, we're able to actually get in touch with people internationally who have time for us now that they never would have had time for before. I mean, you had Brian McLaren here last week, right? So, I mean, so these sorts of things are much easier. So a lot of the churches that I'm working with, when they get this sense of maybe what God is calling them to next, or what they want to learn about next, they connect with churches or church leaders around the world who we know are similar, or this have stories to share that would resonate and would intrigue. calling forward, beckoning. So that's been another really interesting thing that's happened because of this pivot, and because of being isolated and not being able to live your life as you did before.
Yes, and we've gotten together so much more now in a way than we might have gotten together once a year or every other year in the past. No, we're sort of all together all the time. It's wonderful.
Yeah,
I want to give
yeah.
the last thought today to Astrid. She says, we've come to see the church she has come to see has had a privileged position in society for so long. It's painful to become the servant to our communities that Jesus calls us to be. Ain't that the truth, though?
It's very, very true.
Yeah.
We have to remember that, and this is a hard learning, that there are many people in our neighborhoods and communities around us who have no idea that we as the church have any interest in their well-being. And that's where we start.
Well said.
That is the challenge to take away today. We are out of time, but thank you. I'm sorry I couldn't get to everyone's comments, but there's some awesome comments. Keep the conversation going. We can still talk all day long, and thank you very much. Janet, thank you.
Thanks,
It's
Janet.
my pleasure. My pleasure. Nice conversation, and it's always good to work with you, Lisa and Neil. Yeah, hoping for many years to come.
I hope so, indeed.
Well, and you are a gift to the national church, that's for sure. And I think you are a carrier of stories and helping us rethink and reimagine. So what a gift this opportunity has been today. I'm just going to do one more station identification, Neil. This is Pew and Beyond. It's an initiative of the Spiritual Formation for Discipleship Network of the Anglican Church of Canada. And we invite you to check out our Facebook page by the same title, Spiritual Formation for Discipleship. And who do we have next week, Neil?
Next week, our guest at the time will be Amy Jo Levine. And we're very excited to announce she is the professor of New Testament and Jewish Studies at Vanderbilt University. So, and she's going to help launch us into Holy Week next week. So come with a lot of questions, tell your friends, and it should be a very enlivening conversation. Thank you all for joining us.